Second Book of Kings, chapters 7 to 9 today, and you may have spotted that last week was Second Book of Kings, chapters 5 to 7. So am I doing 7 twice? The answer is no. I just thought I'd done 7 last week and I hadn't, so never mind. Chapter 7 anyway is this really weird bit. It's very confusing. There's 4 lepers who go and do some stuff that seems like it was going to be bad and then decide they're going to be good. Someone is trampled to death. Elisha, we thought, was having some people coming to cut his head off, and this just seems to go away. So chapter 7 is really weird anyway, so we're not going to worry about it. Chapter 8 begins with the Shunammite woman who doesn't have a name and whose son was brought back to life by Elisha with the super magic. She's being warned by Elisha that there's some famine coming for the next 7 years, obviously 7, and he sends her away and she goes off to the land of the Philistines to hide there for 7 years away from this famine. Comes back at the end of it and oddly seems to turn up at the palace where she's going to ask the king if she can have her stuff back. And Elisha's servant is there at the same time talking to the king, happening to be talking about her. And in she walks. The king seems to be super impressed with this and decides that yes, you can have all your stuff back and you can have the interest you've missed out on from the last 7 years. So, yeah, seems all good. Except, of course, the king doesn't have a name, so we're not sure which one he's on about anyway. I meant to say as well, I'm not quite sure where Shunammite have come from, because I think the Shunammite woman we encountered before was the first reference for Shunammite. Can't quite tell, there's a lot of words. As far as I can tell, they do seem to be some sort of subset of Israelites, so it doesn't sound like it's this random new thing. It's just, I don't really know. I don't think we really care. Does it really matter? I think probably not. We're then back to Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, who I'm very confused about. I thought he'd been killed in some battle a while ago, but evidently got that wrong. I'm sure I'll have to go and look that back up again at some point. But he falls ill and gets one of his servants called Hazael. I think I'm just going to call him Hazel because that's hilariously conjures images of some sort of lovely old lady doing flower arranging or something, and this guy, as you're about to find out, is not nice. Hazel is anyway sent to see Elisha and ask if the king is going to be okay. Basically the answer is no, and Elisha's saying to Hazel that he's going to be a horrible person. He's going to go and kill the king, then take over, and he is then going to go and do terrible things to the Israelites and everybody else. Hazel then goes back to Ben-Hadad, who then asks what's going on, and instead of being nice and arranging some flowers or anything, he gets a wet cloth and puts over the king's head so he dies. We then have Jehoshaphat is succeeded by his son as king of Judah, the one tribe of Israel. His son, unfortunately, is called Jehoram, which is very confusing because Joram is one of the kings of the other 11 tribes who was terrible. Yeah, that's right. And I don't know what this thing is where they keep naming each other for very close to or exactly the same as opposite kings. It's very confusing. It does also sound a little bit like Jehoram is sometimes referred to as Joram because there's a footnote about Hebrew spelling. So, when they're talking about Jehoram or Joram, it's very difficult to tell. It doesn't seem to matter anyway because he's not king for very long. And then he's a terrible king, obviously. And then he's succeeded by another king called Ahaziah, or Ahaziah, being the same name as we had for the 11 tribes of Egypt king. No, 11 tribes of Israel. We have now have an Ahaziah on the Judah side, just to confuse everybody. He, of course, is also a bad king, and he's then wounded in battle, I think. It's getting very difficult to tell. But it sounds like Elisha has then had enough anyway, so he gets one of a sub-prophet to go and find another son of Jehoshaphat called Jehu, who I think we've encountered before, I thought. Could be this Tarantino time thing. I think there's some of that going on here, which is not helping. But anyway, this Jehu guy is made king and takes over the reign of Judah, albeit Judah still has another king, but it's okay because Jehu just goes and finds everybody and kills them. So he goes and kills Ahaziah, being the previous king of the tribe of Judah. Then he kills Joram, or Jehoram, depending on which one that is, who is anyway the king of the other 11 tribes of Israel. And then he goes and kills Jezebel, who's that terrible wife of whoever it was some time ago. And as God predicted, she's trampled to death by horses. Not a great way to go. And Jehu's off doing something else, decides, okay, well, maybe we'll go and bury her. Goes back to get her to bury her, and all they find is her skull and her hands, I think it was. Sounded like she has been eaten by dogs in the street, as God said she would be. In the short version of that story, anyway, we've had 962 kings, all of whom seem to have the same name and somehow changed the spelling of their names, so it's extremely confusing and kind of annoying. I'm tempted to try and untangle it, but I'm not sure I can be bothered. I figure we're just going through a period here, and anything vaguely interesting we'll try and pull out. But otherwise, we're just going to hope some sanity prevails on the other side. It seems anyway that Jehu seems like God trying to get things back on track. And he sent Elisha to specifically go and anoint someone. And then Jehu's killed everybody. So it sounds potentially like he's going to unite the 12 tribes. Not sure, but we'll have to find out. In terms of the interesting points to come out of that, one of the key things is I've just completely lost the plot of who's who. It's so confusing. I'm sure if I sat down and spent 2 hours reading this, I spent maybe half an hour reading it, then maybe it could be untangled. We can do another chart, but I think I'm just not convinced there's much point. And then there's that sort of weird inconsistency in the story that Elisha was having people coming to cut his head off, and then suddenly he's fine and he sends a Shunammite woman away for 7 years, and then she comes back, and so he's clearly fine 7 years later. So unless there's some Tarantino time messy about going on, I don't know. We will come back to this if that causes any big problem, and I'll have to untangle it, but for now we'll just sort of gloss over, move on. Another interesting point to come out of that, though, is God's grim determination to preserve this line of David. So it seems almost no matter what, he finds a way to get that line continuing down the Judah tribe. It seems this is because he promised David that there would be a direct descendant to this foreshadowing of what sounded like Jesus in 1,000 years' time. So David's line has to be intact for a very, very long time. But it does seem a little bit sort of token gesture. It's not like we haven't seen God say one thing and then think, actually, no, I'm going to change my mind and do something else. Plus, you've got the big question of God surely knows what's going to happen, because if he's outside time, then by definition he can see everything that's ever happened ever and ever will happen ever. So he would have known anyway. But then I guess that's the point. This is a human book written by people trying to make sense of what God is doing. So yeah, it's a particularly difficult section to keep up with, but yeah, we'll soldier on anyway, and hopefully something sensible will emerge. But we have at least established that the kingdom is still divided and David's line is still intact, which does seem to be potentially the most important bit. And Elisha, still super big deal anyway.